Welcome everyone to the MBA speaker series. This one is the third of our speaker series. The speaker series has been created last year, or the beginning of this year, actually. It's like 2 years ago with the pandemic. But the beginning of this year, we created the MBA speaker series as a way of keeping in touch with our alumni, and in a way of really showcasing the success of our alumni, who we are very proud of. And to really engage as well with the people the students and the people that are doing the MBA, so they can see what being an alumni means. But also, we know sometimes we often have people that might want to come and have an MBA, and they can actually go and have that experience of hearing, the journey that an MBA is. And so we started and we invited today. So we're going to have another one of these in December and another one in February and May next year. So today we have Caroline Waterworth and Dr. Elaine Swan. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell them more about them in a second. But to start with, I wanted to say why we are doing this particular. So we are trying to, the topic that we try to touch upon are usually topics that have to do with current themes. And sometimes some of our MBAs really manage to come up with something that makes us think, oh my gosh, that's super interesting. And this is exactly what Caroline did. She had an essay published in the Women Budget blog, which is a really important women network that influences policy about women and gender in at work. And she came up with this. She used one of the theory that she picked up during her MBA to write this blog. And this, of course, attracted Elaine's attention, and she told me, and we thought, okay, let's have a conversation about this. So I'm going to ask Caroline and Elaine to introduce each other for a bit. Maybe Caroline, we can start from you, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and we're going to touch about this essay to start with, and then we are going to perhaps ask a few questions. So the way that this event is going to be structured is we're going to have an initial conversation between Elaine and Caroline. So it's going to be kind of lightly facilitated by me. And then we are thinking of having the Q&A at the end. But if you have questions along, please put them in the chat, and I will do my best to pick them up and really get them into the conversation. So here we go. Caroline, would you like to tell us few points about yourself? Your journey into the MBA, your journey after the MBA, and we start from there. And then maybe Elaine, I'll get you to introduce yourself after that. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks, Zahira, and thanks to the university for having me and having me back. So where do I start? I was a lawyer in the run-up to my MBA. I'd worked in a number of different areas, but I had most recently been an in-house lawyer running a litigation team for a mobile phone company. It can remain nameless now. And I took the leap of faith on the back of having got to a place with that I was quite happy, and wanted to get a bit more creative with the business areas that I was interacting with, because I had come from a litigation background. So I was busy spending a lot of time arguing with people, and I only ever saw stuff when it got broken. That's really quite disconcerting, because I know
I discovered the spotlight function.
Wow, I wasn't ready for that, I have to tell you. So I will try and carry on whilst now ignoring myself, like talking to a mirror, which is very, very odd. So I was feeding back into the business about how they could avoid tripping themselves up in the way that I was having to unpick for them. And I realized that actually there was much more to a business than I was ever seeing, because I was only ever seeing it at the end point when it was broken. So that made me really interested, and I had been for a number of years in doing an MBA. But I got 2 children, and at the time they were smaller and obviously needed quite a lot more of my time and engagement. So finding the right MBA for me was really quite a challenge. Commuting into London, I'm Brighton based, wasn't really an option for me. Then I did some research of local offers and was really impressed by what the University of Sussex could offer and what I could do with that. So I applied and I was really pleased to be accepted. And I actually then took a leap and did it full time. So I quit my job and decided that actually my background plus the MBA would hopefully guarantee me future employment. It turns out I was right. So that's so I studied between 2017 and 18, and I then went into initially a pure local government position within a council. And more recently, I have then joined KPMG. So I've combined the local authority experience with a professional services background, all sort of built on the bedrock of my legal qualifications in the background and that experience and exposure I had to business there. So that's kind of my journey through the MBA, but the piece that really has stayed with me throughout is the work that I did around my dissertation, and working with Elaine was really instrumental in sort of taking me through a double strand. So not only my career path, but also I suppose I would use the term activism because I have this awareness now. I remember the first time I sat down with the reading list that Elaine gave me, and I read some materials and I was just cross. And then I went to the first lecture and then I was more cross. And it's it sounds like I've been very angry ever since. And on one level, but not with Elaine, really not with Elaine, because it just created this awareness of this societal, organizational, uphill struggle that's just embedded and hard baked into particularly organizations, but much more widely than that. And once you can see those injustices, and once you can identify where your privilege is making your path easier, and that's not to say that people's lives are not without issue, because everybody's life is with issue. That's not what privilege is. But once you can see that, you can never not see that. So I've been cross since 2017, okay. But hopefully doing something positive with it. Hence the article.
Okay. So just let me, reinterpret or see if I've understood that correctly. So what you're saying is that during the MBA, you come across some theories that really made you see the world differently.
It's the difference between, so if I relate it back to a sort of a personal interaction, I joined the bar when I had 2 small children, and I then reflected that perhaps the maternity leave policies for those who might follow and need maternity leave, I didn't need maternity leave because I'd already had mine, could be reworked. And then I was told, no, I don't think we need to do that because you've made it work with 2 small children. And that interaction had made me cross. But then what I started doing was I then realized that I had all of this vocabulary and this lens to look at all of those past personal interactions, but also all of those for other people I had witnessed or heard about anecdotally. And I was sort of just replaying my entire life through this lens of unfairness. Yes, felt that I wanted to really understand the practical steps, because being cross just for the sake of being cross is a bit but what could I do for myself, for my daughter and my son, to make sure that they were not going to be part of the problem as they got older. So that was a real motivation for me.
Okay.
And then in terms of my position in various work roles since then, my focus is certainly on and not just for women, just for anybody in my team, because individuals need different things, and understanding how you can interpret rules and apply equality and fairness, that lens has become really important to me and my approach, and that comes in very much through the work that not only that Elaine lectured me on, but then the dissertation that I worked with her on and that she supervised me through. So yeah, those are sort of hardwired now into my approach, both in terms of being a manager, being a parent, and being a citizen, I suppose.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So I would like to to move to Elaine now to ask her what she's done to Caroline effectively. So what we've just heard now is the story of a woman who is extremely committed to her career and to her success and the success of her family, and also to an idea of contributing to the organizations in which she works. I identify a lot with this idea because I think I was one of these women as well when I was in banking for 15 years. And I think a lot of the women that come to the MBA, but also everyone else that comes to the MBA, comes with this sense of commitment, right? Otherwise, why would you do an MBA, right? So this sense of commitment to our career and to our ability to be productive and to do good things in life. And then she came with a set of issues, some were conscious, some were unconscious, and that she met Elaine. And now we're going to speak to Elaine, and we're going to see how the story continues. And I'm going to spotlight you. I've now discovered the spotlight function, and I'm just going to go crazy.
You're the power. You've got the power. So I'm a senior lecturer at Sussex. I'm a member of the Future of Work Hub. So that's, for those of you who don't know, it's like a kind of research centre where we're thinking about different aspects of work. In terms of my own biography, like many of us, and as Caroline sort of outlined herself, you know, we've had lots of career changes, and that's part of how our work lives pan out. So after I finished university, I worked as a fashion buyer for Selfridges. For those of you who don't know, Selfridges is a sort of large department store. It now has several department stores. But at the time it was in London, and I was buying menswear, and I really enjoyed my time there. It was very exciting. It was at the time when menswear was becoming exciting, and everybody working there was quite young, and we were in the centre of London. So I very much enjoyed that time in my life. But I moved from the buying side into management development at Selfridges. I was responsible for the graduate trainee scheme, and then I was responsible for training assistant buyers to become buyers. And I did that until my early 30s, and I did an MA, a bit like Caroline. Doing a postgraduate qualification can change who you are and how you think and what you want to do. A bit like Zahira was saying, you know, you kind of want to do something different in the world and different in the workplace. And then for 10 years, I joined with friends to run our own organizational development consultancy. And then I joined Lancaster University Business School and started my PhD. I seem to do things in 10 years because then after 10 years there, I moved to Sydney, and I was at the University of Technology in Sydney just under 10 years, and then I joined Sussex. I work on 3 key areas with my research. I look at critical diversity studies. I look at what I call the interface between therapy culture and the workplace. That's what I did my PhD on. By therapy culture, I mean the way that we're encouraged to psychologize ourselves. And I can say more if anybody's interested in that. And then the third area, which is quite unusual, is in food studies. So I've written a lot looking at food social enterprises and food work, both in the domestic sphere, but also in other spheres. So that's a bit of sort of the background. So what did I do to Caroline? Well, it's just really wonderful to be here. And I'm very grateful for Zahira and Amy for making this happen. And Zahira has done a lot of work behind the scenes to get us to think about how we work together. And she's got some really great questions that we'll be answering. But what I'm very clear about is that I'm a feminist. And to say that you're a feminist in the MBA classroom, you know, you're saying the F word. And people make all sorts of assumptions about what it might mean if you self-identify as a feminist. Sometimes it's assumed that you hate men, or sometimes it's assumed, I've had students say to me, are you going to shove this down our throats? quite a sort of violent metaphor, which people don't say of strategy. So it's interesting, as soon as you say that you're a feminist, it generates all these kinds of anxieties, but also excitements, I think, mainly among the women, but not just among the women. Because I think about gender, and that's one of the things I know Caroline's been thinking a lot about. Women aren't the only ones with genders, and we know from other movements like trans movements and non-binary movements that how we think about gender and how we enact gender is very complicated. So the idea of making Caroline cross comes from a commitment. One is a feminist commitment, which Caroline can say some more about. But I have a commitment as an academic to support students to read and think about ideas and theory in quite complicated ways. It's something that I decided on when I became an academic, when I was in my 40s. I was really grateful when I was working to come across theories, a bit like Caroline was saying, that helped me explain things that I didn't really understand, but felt in the workplace. So I found it really helpful when I came across concepts or studies that helped me put words to what I had experienced. And I'm a great believer. I believe that all students are clever. So I set quite complicated readings and I lecture to complicated ideas because I believe that it's possible for all students to relate to those ideas. It means I have to do a lot of what's called scaffolding. So I think in encountering the work of Joan Acker, for example, and Nirmal Puar, a bit of Sarah Ahmed.
Can I make a little bit of an interjection here? So what we haven't heard yet, and I like to ask maybe Caroline now, and is what she wrote. And then I would like then you to tell us about these theories in connection to what Caroline wrote, if you don't mind, Elaine.
Sure. I was getting ready for Elaine to
this do is a great, exactly. So this is a great introduction, and I love the fact that at the core of your intention is really to provide students with possible alternative realities, because we do get stuck in our own ways, and especially in organization, we do get stuck in way of seeing and thinking that perhaps they're not optimal. They're not optimal for ourselves as individuals. They're not optimal for the organization, and as we see, they're also not optimal for society in general. And so, Caroline came to your class and she heard about Acker's theory of the ideal worker. Now, I don't know, Elaine, if you want to tell us about Acker now, or Caroline, do you want to go ahead and tell us what you heard from Elaine? Maybe then Elaine can pick that up. And what you heard from Elaine, and why then you wrote this piece about the ideal worker, and why this piece was so important for you during the pandemic.
So Elaine used a brilliant phrase about scaffolding. So half of me is going, oh, we should probably hear from Elaine first about Joan Acker and the scaffolding, because that kind of gives it a good framework. But we can absolutely come at it the other way around, and I can talk a little bit.
Yeah.
I was reminiscing as I was listening.
So for our audience, what is the ideal worker? Because we three of us know, right? But these people are hanging in there 23 minutes into the talk that we haven't spoken yet. What is the ideal worker, and why was it so important to you during COVID?
So Joan Acker built on some terminology, and I look forward to Elaine giving much more specific details. But basically, she based some ideas around some American concepts from the 1950s and 60s that sort of were misinterpreted the wrong way around. They were given as a warning, but then kind of became this concept to work towards, which I found really incredibly ironic. So the ideal worker was this sort of fantasy figure where you walk out of the door, think. Like literally think 1950s sitcom American dramas, and you're just about nailing it, right? Husband, typically a husband, walks out of the door at whatever time in the morning he needs in order to be sat at his desk for 9 o'clock. And I am just going to simplify it. with that male figure, because that's relevant to the era that it's based upon. But it doesn't apply just to husbands and men. But the idea that you walk out of the door, you leave all of your home pull behind you, you sit at your desk and you pretend, because I think it is a pretense, for 8 hours a day that you have no other calls on your time. You have no problems with your teeth, your washing machine never breaks, you have no deliveries to receive, you have no children to ferry around. If you actually have no children to ferry around, you have no elderly parents to ferry around, you have no pets that are sick. You can, for the working hours of the day, dedicate your time and attention to your work. Now that works if you have one of two things: either genuinely nothing outside of your work, so that's one solution to that problem, or the other is that you have somebody who is picking up that life stuff for you, and that is traditionally been in that husband-wife division of labour split, where a wife will then give up their career because they will start doing things like measuring their earning ability against childcare. They're not measuring the household earning ability against childcare costs and the impact on future career progression for both parents. But interestingly, I think, and I can come on to this in more detail later, but I think interestingly that kind of common perception about it traditionally being the women's side of the financial equation that gets that applied to the bottom line is beginning to shift. And I think that there's a definite impact of the pandemic into that rationale.
Okay, great. So tell us a little bit about how did you come? So then you wrote this essay, and this essay basically speaks about how during the pandemic, this construct or this, utopia of the ideal worker completely collapsed, right? Because we actually found ourselves to work from the same place that we were trying to ignore in order to be the ideal worker, as in, you cannot anymore separate so neatly your work life from your real life, family life during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And so what did you write? How did this elicit to think you about differently? I mean, what was your essay about in two words? Then I will go back to Elaine at some point.
It was about the breakdown of the ability to be ideal. Effectively, it was jumping through Alice's looking glass, because nobody could be ideal, and there was massive upsides for some people, and there were massive downsides to others. And I really wanted to. I was reflecting on that for myself, and my dissertation topic, which was gender, networking, and promotion opportunities. So how those three concepts interweave. I began to sort of pick them apart again in light of the new way of working, and sought to then put them back together in a way that kept the good stuff that had come from the pandemic, but gave a note of caution, particularly with my management head on, to other managers, because there was this real risk, and all of the surveys that were being done at the time a few months ago were showing that men were much more attuned to go back to the office, and women were kind of going, oh, this is great, I can now find it much more, I can balance much more easily the school run with my work, and I don't have to commute now. But actually, where fathers had perhaps been more engaged in that sort of family activity, they seemed more willing to sort of revert to the old ways. So I came at it with that sort of lens of how do you keep the good stuff for everybody, because there were real positives around once people had kind of got over that initial shock of what was happening. Real positive messaging I was hearing anecdotally from colleagues and friends that actually family time was really precious and had taken on a really enhanced dimension. So how do we keep that? How do we keep the really good mental health aspects, the diversity opportunities, and that family time that was coming through from this, without going back to those sort of old habits of, I leave my home behind because somebody else has that, because everybody now knows that we all have that all the time.
Yes, no, that's great. So, what I'm hearing is that there was a new awareness that really came up for you, that prompted you to really speak very articulate about this ideal worker. Also, let's not forget that this is absolutely not a Caroline Waterworth problem. You know, there is huge amount of statistics that show that really women bore the greatest weight during the pandemic. You know, a lot of women had to really leave work in order to cope with what was going on in the house, with the homeschooling and so on and so forth, much more than men. So the situation it was heavy for everyone, but really especially for one side of the genders. And Elaine, how do feminist theory help us make sense of this? Is this a too broad question? I can tighten it up if you want.
No, that's great. No, the questions are very helpful. I think that what Caroline just elaborated on is a pointer to how feminist theories can help. One of the things that Caroline was talking about is how she started to see things differently. So that's one of the ways that feminist theory can help us, is that it gives us a different set of concepts to interpret what's going on. Caroline also spoke about the way that she sort of keeps going back to her dissertation and to the ideas in there. So she used it to make sense of her experiences and her own career, and how she was trying to change opportunities for women and care in her own organisation. But she sort of returned to it during COVID, because again, she could sense things that were happening. So clearly part of feminist theory is to theorize. And one of the brilliant things about people like Joan Acker and Nirmal Puar is that they condense very complicated ideas into some key concepts. So the idea of the ideal worker is a kind of concept behind which is a lot of thinking, but as a sort of shorthand, it says a lot. And another phrase that Joan Acker has that I really love is regimes of inequality. And one of the reasons I use Joan Acker is because she's a sociologist, so she's interested in social practices, which means she's interested in the patterned, systematic ways in which inequality at the levels of class, race, gender, heteronormativity, disability, the way that these are patterned into the organization. And I think that's why I like Joan Acker and Nirmal Puar, is because they're looking at the systems and practices and procedures that we take for granted, or that seem just part of the way that the organization does things, but they're actually reproducing inequalities. So something as simple as a job description, that's one of the things that Joan Acker has written about. The other thing about theorizing is, as you said, Zahira, very eloquently, is it takes us out of ourselves. It makes us stop in our tracks. And one of the dimensions of feminism that many people have forgotten about is the idea of consciousness raising. And this is individual consciousness raising, but it's collective consciousness raising, which is a way of making us see our worlds in very different ways. And some of you will know that Kurt Lewin, who is a very interesting organizational theorist, often reduced to, one or two models, but actually far more interesting. He said there's nothing as practical as a good theory. And that's my view on feminist theories.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think that what I'm going to do from now on, I'm going to borrow some of Elaine's wisdom for my own teaching in management in the MBA. So definitely a good idea. But I think that what Elaine is telling us is that often when we teach management, we think that we give too much agency to the individual manager, right? So we say, if you do this and that, and this is especially true in the case of leadership, right? When we teach leadership, we say, if you do this and that, if you're authentic, if you are whatever else, if you can look after your followers, if you can do this and that, then you're going to have positive consequences. But what we are not realizing there, and I think that this is why the sociological lens of feminism, as Elaine just said, is really interesting. The sociological lens asks us to take a bird's eye view of the situation, to step, to really fly higher and look from above and think, hold on one second, how is it organized over here, right? What things can we do differently? And I think this is the pandemic is offering us this fantastic opportunity to, because it has shaken so many habits, is offering us this fantastic opportunity to really start thinking about things differently. And maybe also because it's such a collective experience, it's not anymore an individual experience, but it's something that definitely unifies us in these difficulties, allows us also to have broader conversation with others, like this. And so the question is, Caroline, can I actually spotlight you or put you on the spot with my question here about how then are you seizing this moment? Are you seizing this moment to have this conversation into your organization? Because you've been very brave from the outset. You came back from maternity leave when you were a lawyer, and you said to the people in the chambers, hold on one second, the maternity leave here is not working. And they said, you already had it, you can put up with it and move on. But, clearly you are fighting for something which is just not in Caroline's interest. You have a bit more of a sense of a mission, and you said it yourself. You're doing it for your children, right? You're doing it for your children, for the future. And I think that we all women, and I'm sure many men as well, but I can say I also do it for my children, for my daughter, but for my son as well, right? So, what are you doing now? How is this activism, newly found activism, materializing for you in your career now? And then, if that's okay, maybe we can see how this goes, and then maybe I can open for Q&As in like 10 minutes or so we can have another bit of conversation on this. Again, if you have questions, people on the audience, would be lovely to hear on the chat, and I can start asking them, or we can open up later. Okay, yes, Caroline.
Yeah, the sociology point, I think Jonah really on that level, and I've continued my reading around sociology, psychology, behavioral change. It all pins together. Is the feed okay?
Oh, I think I need to put some people on mute, so that, don't worry, it's okay. Yeah, keep on going. Sorry, the line got interrupted.
That's fine. So I think the question of simple maths, because if everybody else is looking out for everybody else, then that's looking out for yourself. So I kind of have taken that principle.
Sorry, we are losing you a little bit.
Is it come back?
Yeah, I think it is back. If it's not back, then we're going to leave it for 5 seconds. I'm going to ask Elaine a question, but let's see if it's back. Keep on going.
I think the morning's gone. So for me, it's a question of simple maths and kind of common sense. And then because I feel that I've got the tools in my toolkit via working with Elaine, I kind of see it as an opportunity to share that, to role model it. And I'm okay to put my head above the parapet. It does feel awkward, and you do feel vulnerable when you do it. You do it a few times, you don't actually die, literally, and you continue. So you kind of go, oh, okay, so that felt odd calling that out, because nobody else called it out, but nobody else called it out, so why shouldn't I call it out? Because it needs to be called out. So you kind of you find your voice to do that. Well, I did anyway. I'm really privileged where I am now, in the really great awareness within the organisation of the areas that need to be worked on: social mobility, diversity, etc. So there's an opportunity for me to contribute there. We've got things up and running like lean-in circles. Now, on the hand, I find the concept of the lean-in circle one-dimensional, in the sense that it is upon women, because that then says that's your problem, and that doesn't really work for me as an end point. Absolutely. But as a tool to educate others and to inspire and to move the conversation along, taking to the networking point, I do find that a valuable tool. So I've engaged in that at work, and again, people are really listen to messaging about how do we position across the entire organization, because what you need for change to happen is that minority voice to not be a minority. So the 30% club, etc. When you hit that 30% level, that's when you affect change. So where I can see an opportunity to do that, so things I will call out, use of guys in when people say to me, but it's a neutral gendered phrase. I go, okay, gendered phrase, let's use that instead then, which invariably ends up with a conversation about, well, what should we use instead for the team?
So give us an example of this. Is interesting. So because we're now really getting into the politics of gender in organizations. So can you give us the example of a sentence that you say that then gets kind of instrumentalized or politicized and you have to change? Do you have an example?
So the big one for me is coming into a physical meeting and saying hi guys to a room that is men and women.
Okay.
That is quite a big one, because so much flows from that. There's this idea that only it has value. If you're not a guy, you don't have the value.
If you're not a guy or you don't behave as a guy.
I know it's an Americanism.
Yeah,
it's an Americanism, and I've had men explain to me where it's come from. I'm like, I get where it's come from, but actually the concept of what it's shorthand for and what it means to different people needs to be listened to, because it may be that you're okay with using it, okie dokie, but actually understand that you're making a positive choice to use a phrase detriment in terms of what the concepts are that are attached to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting.
One for me, and another one at work recently was some training has come out, and to get an accessible format of this training, email this address. So if you've got an accessibility issue already, you now have an extra step to go through in order to reach a version of that for you.
Yeah.
But everybody could work with an accessible format. So why is a different version of the training being produced for what is 70%? Because actually, I think it's about 3 in 10 people have an accessibility issue where they need an accessible form. Why are we making that distinction, and why are we putting an additional hurdle in place? So it's those, and once you start, you kind of don't stop. You see them everywhere. And I think you can, if you're trying to make it easier for people, I think it's incumbent upon people who don't need those alterations to try and raise awareness, because otherwise we're putting an inordinate burden on a minority, which is just so that's where I sort of find myself in a work environment.
Great. That's great. So, you do not, so this ability of looking at things from a systemic perspective have also allowed you to be prepared in the moments in which you find something which you see as unfair, to be able to categorize it, to be able to articulate why this is unfair, to be able also to explain why things can be done differently at a very low cost. So that this is really incredibly interesting. And I must admit that on the academic side, because we teach these things, we kind of take them for granted in a way. But, having been in the workplace as well for many years, like we've all been, in the workplace, you really feel silly in correcting people or in calling people out. But if you have this kind of overlay of preparation, it's great, right? You can actually do it. You can actually do it because you know why you're doing it. It's not just you. It's a systemic thing, and some change needs to happen, and you have the courage for it. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Caroline. I can see there are some questions that are starting to come in. So I'm going to ask Elaine last question, maybe a last comment, and then we go to the questions. So let me look in my question library. just picking up on what Caroline is saying, Elaine, any other comments you want to make at actually what practically people can do at work to support each other in their careers? What can women do? But I don't want to say just women, because I know that it's not only women in this situation. Women are the big half of the population. It's easy to speak about women, but we have a lot of people that feel forgotten, people with disability, people with no normal, way of thinking, people with neurodiversity. So how can people develop a voice? I mean, I know I'm entering into a very quick, you could speak for an hour about this. So can you give us 2 or 3 points here?
I think Caroline said it very succinctly, which is it's not about us fixing ourselves. It's about how the organization can support transformation. So one of the dangers is if we try and do things on our own, it can put us in some spotlight and maybe some dangerous positions. So your points here about doing things collectively is very important. But it's also about the organization taking responsibility for what it is producing in terms of practices and cultures. And what Joan Acker does so brilliantly is to point to things like job descriptions, like promotion criteria. And to go back to Caroline's work, the notion of the ideal worker is embedded in the organization. So who gets promoted, who appears in recruitment literature, et cetera, et cetera. So the organization has to take responsibility for, if it cares about social justice, in looking at those processes which seem quite gender neutral or race neutral, and listening to groups that are minoritized or disadvantaged. But it can take a lot of emotional labor and a lot of burden to try and fix things yourself. So my advice would be, as Caroline said, that you develop some sort of collective support, but that also you look to the organization.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Caroline and Elaine. I think this has been a very interesting talk. I really think hopefully this is provocative for the people online on how you can use actually theories, how you can use new knowledge to take a step back, to become an activist. In order to become an activist, you don't need to go and block the M25. In order to become an activist, you can do daily acts of activism. So, the new ideal worker, or, the ideal worker doesn't exist anymore in this reality. We can really not afford to pretend that there is anything like the ideal worker. And so if we cannot pretend this anymore, what do we do? And I think we had a really interesting conversation about this. So we have one question from George online. George is actually connecting from Infinity Food, and he's actually saying that Infinity Food is a very particular cooperative way of working without managers. So is the new ideal worker actually found in the formation of more worker co-ops? So can we actually say that if we can think about an ideal worker, a cooperative, a collective, which I think where we're going with this conversation, a collective way of thinking, a collective way of organizing is possibly better. What do you think? Maybe Elaine or Caroline, I don't know.
Do you want to go, Caroline?
Okay, Elaine, up to you.
Go, Elaine, I think.
Okay, so I think it's important to recognize that the concept of the ideal worker isn't saying that that's where we want to head. So it's not like the perfect worker. It's more the way that the workplace reproduces an idea of their unburdened, unencumbered worker. And it gets reproduced through job descriptions, adverts, who gets promoted. And it's often gendered and racialized. So that's important to say. Are cooperatives and collectives good places to work? Well, I think you'd have to look at the specificities of how they work. In principle, by reducing hierarchy, you're getting more participation and you're getting better decision making. So in principle, collectives and cooperatives can be better in terms of power inequities. The problem is that it's very hard work to keep up the cooperative working, as those of us who've sort of worked in collaborative situations will know. That doesn't mean you shouldn't keep at it. Yeah, you know, in a university, we try and be collaborative, but there are a lot of, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of hard work.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Elaine. I wanted to ask if people have more questions, if you want to put them in the chat. So Nicola is asking an interesting question. She's saying, not sure the phrase guys is a systemic issue of gender inequality. Yeah, I mean, it's a masculine term that we are applying to everyone blankly. So, you know, I think that we already spoke about this. She's saying, are we saying that the ideal worker is completely politically correct? I think this is a good provocation, which I'm going to throw in the mix. So are we saying that we need to be completely politically correct?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I think, you know, my language choices are not always going to be what everybody wants them to be, because I'm not everybody. So all of my actions from and informed by my own experiences. So whilst I sort of seek to absorb different learning and different viewpoints, I'm never going to get it right. And I think for me, a massive shift was an act trying to get it right for what others needed was a significant improvement on just blind ignorance. So that's me. So I don't think I pursue a sort of politically correct agenda. I think I come from a position of testing, is that fair? If I was in that situation, what do I think I would need? If I was in a wheelchair, would I find it acceptable that my experience of travelling on the railways is completely different to somebody who's able-bodied and able to make adjustments when a railway station lift isn't working, for example? So trying to sort of put that lens on it. And in terms of guys, as I say, I've had those conversations innumerable times within my own family and within my own friends group and within my work peers. And I think for me, it's not an end and therefore dreadful in and of itself, but I think it might be, without awareness, the start of a slippery slope. So I think if you are consciously using it, I think, you know, again, I'm not going to judge anybody on
It's a very good point. The guys terminology is quite interesting because I was not really bothered by it at the beginning because I worked for American organization for such a long time. I think I got normalized into it. But I think that bringing it up really makes me reflect. I think it's really the top of the iceberg, the really easy bit that we can see, that can make us think about what's behind it, what's behind this way of thinking, this normalization of a masculine term. You know, what is this assuming that we have not spoken about and thought about? And so Georgia is actually asking, what was the result of identifying the guys as an issue? Has it changed? Have you made any change, Caroline, there?
I found allies very quickly. So people who've been in the organisation for a while, who said, I've been raising this for ages. We then naturally kind of gravitated to each other. It meant that we were able to sort of share the burden a little bit more in other meetings. And we were also able to touch on what we wanted to do in terms of client language, because we're really clear with clients if they raise something that's racially inappropriate, clearly gender inappropriate, and so forth. What we can do. We've got the backing of the organisation, but guys was a little bit in the grey area. So having some weight behind it was like, actually, we're not okay with this. It's not solved it, because I don't think it's necessarily the number one problem, but I think it is. It's perhaps a good one to practice your voice on, and think about what you think about it, and see whether it's something you can test down at the pub with your friends and kind of go, what does this mean for everybody? I trust you. It will lead some interesting conversation.
Okay, so that's a great point. We have done Dean Spears asking a question. which I'm not sure I'm interpreting correct. So Dean, I hope I will interpret this correctly. But what resonates me with your question is that you are saying that the ideal worker also implies an ideal workplace, right? So there is a connection between this idea of the ideal worker and the ideal workplace. And if I may just go in there, and in Acker's mind, the idea of having an ideal the ideal workplace is the place where we possibly leave everything outside the door, right? So we transform as soon as we cross that threshold of this ideal workplace, we leave everything outside the door, which is clearly not possible anymore, especially when we're working from home. So I guess that's the answer. Any more comments on that ideal workplace, Elaine?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really important to note that her concept of the ideal worker is a criticism. And yes, the ideal worker, the ideal organization would be a masculine one. So she's a feminist. She does see things in terms of gender. So the ideal worker in the time she was writing would have been a white middle-class man. And the ideal organization is one that enables white middle-class men to do well. What we've seen with COVID is questions raised about care in a public way that we haven't had before. So lots of questions about caring responsibility and caring infrastructure. And there was a moment, as Caroline said, when actually as a society, we could have done something about this in systematic ways, but we've let it go. And it will be very difficult now to reconceive of care and care work in politically progressive ways, I think.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Elaine. I have two questions about education. I'm gonna, because we just have a couple of minutes to the end, I'm just gonna join them up. One is from Sophie and one is from Chandraban. The one from Sophie is more about education in the workplace. So how do we ensure that these views that, Caroline so eloquently spoke about, changing things on the front line, even, when, thinking about clients and, be sure not to assume that this ideal worker is everywhere, or it's a male that is free from 9 to 5. How do we then get this one incorporated into the organization from a more systematic point of view? She asks, do we do this through training, or she actually says, do we do this by taxing, by creating a form of punishment, or like disincentive, let's say? How can we do this? What is the most effective way? I kind of have an answer, but I'm gonna just kind of, yeah.
I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but my take on it would be that the real change comes from be that taking parental leave, being seen to support it in a different way, putting language around it that's a change. It's putting policies in place, but you've got to be really, am I right? Got to be really careful with policy.
Okay, we are losing you. The signal is a bit difficult.
That's okay. I think.
Yeah, I'll move to Elaine. Elaine, you have a smile on. Do you have something to say, which is kind of?
No, I agree with Caroline. I think one of the things Caroline is saying is around dominant groups. So if it's white men, what they can do, not fix the women. If it's white groups, what can they do in relation to racism? The same with sort of able-bodiedness. The key is that it's systematic. Training hasn't proven very effective. So I wrote a chapter on diversity training, and it was called "Don't Shove That Down Our Throats," and you immediately get these defensive reactions. So you have to work systematically through the multiple processes and practices through which people are disadvantaged. And the best organizations do that. They look at pay, they look at promotion, they look at challenging dominant practices and saying, that's not common sense, that's actually a gendered practice or a racialized practice. So it's hard work. That doesn't mean we should give up.
No.
That's why we should do it more.
Thank you very much. This is a great note to finish. We have 1 minute to the end, and I just wanted to do some thanks and some summing up. So I think that summing up, I would like to say that the idea that Acker had in 1990 of the fact that there was an ideal worker, which we can actually define an idealized worker, right? So a worker that does not exist, but that we idealize in our mind and we pretend we are that worker, as Caroline said. You know, we get out through the company door, and I remember I worked in investment banking for so long, and I'm still wearing a blazer now and in my home, right? So, you know, we pretend, we put on this suit, this armor, and we pretend we are someone that actually we cannot be, because it's impossible if you're a mom not to have your kids in your mind, if you are, you know, anyone not to have the fact that your household has some needs, or the fact that you need a doctor and you cannot turn up unwell at work, which sometimes we do because we are under pressure. So this idealized worker does not exist. COVID has uncovered this in a very, very clear way by pushing us to work from home. And, you know, I think that the reflection here is really, and it's happening everywhere. There are so many people that are resigning in the UK and in the US. People are not accepting the same work conditions as we used to have. And so the question is, how do we go on from here? And how do we make sure that we have better workplaces that really take into account everyone's needs in a much more inclusive way? So Caroline and Elaine, thank you so much for joining us. Caroline, it's very exciting to have you back at Sussex, and Elaine, is always interesting to hear what you have to say, especially on these topics. And thank you everyone for joining.